Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Let's get started with today's class. So this is lecture number 7, and in today's class, we look at some of the circuit techniques for sample and hold circuits. Okay. So in last class, we looked at the following effects. If you remember, of course, the nonlinear or dependence of the on resistance on the input voltage. So this was solved by basically using our bootstrapped switch, right? So we dwelt quite at length at this particular circuit. We looked at least two variants of it, how to build a bootstrapped switch, and we saw that this is capable of overcoming this disadvantage or the problem of having your on resistance varying as a function of your input amplitude, right? Now, the second effect that we saw in last class was basically called as charge injection, right? So what was charge injection? Charge injection was when the switch is turning off, right? Part of the charge in the channel goes and sits on the capacitor, gets deposited on the capacitor, right? So, right, and part of the channel charge goes here and the other part goes to Vin, which is still okay. I mean, we are not bothered about that. But what charge goes on to the capacitor is going to change the value of the held voltage VH, right? So that will basically give you an error, and this is something that we need to figure out a way how to solve this problem, right? And the third effect was basically clock feed through or capacitive feed through, where what we saw was when you have a MOSFET, right, there is some overlap capacitance and there is this CH, right? So when the clock is coming down, right, this also has a small voltage which comes down like this. So there is some delta V which happens, and this is a basic problem. Okay. So we'll look at a few circuit techniques which will try to eliminate these issues to some extent. Okay. Each technique will have its own merits and demerits, and when you are designing a circuit, you have to choose one which is basically going to be the best that will work out for you. Okay. Right. Now, in order to avoid the charge injection problem, okay, there is one technique of using dummy switches or using a dummy switch. So the concept works something like this, right? You have, this is your main switch, let's call it M1, okay? For example, I mean, this can even be a gate boosted switch, whatever it is, let's just call it M1. And let's say this is operating with a, on a phase 5. Okay. Now, when the problem basically happens when this phi is basically going low, right? So what we are going to do is we are going to add a dummy switch. Now, the reason it is dummy is because its source and drain are shorted. Okay. So in effect, it is really not doing any switching work. Okay. And this is given phi bar. Okay. So when phi is going down, phi bar will basically go up. All right. So the concept is that as this switch is turning off, that is switch M1 is turning off, the charge injection which is happening from this thing is going to go here. At the same time, this phi bar is turning, I mean this switch M2 is turning on, which means it needs charge to start flowing into the channel that gets created, right? As this channel is getting turned off and the inversion layer is disappearing for transistor M1, the inversion layer is simultaneously getting formed for transistor M2, and so the transistor M2 is expected to absorb the charges injected out of M1. It is expected to basically take it over. Okay. So if you kind of think of it in a more linear way and say that, let's say, half of the charge in M1 is going to flow into, this direction which I have indicated, then you will say that if this transistor's width and length will be half of it. So this will work only to a first order. Okay. First order, if you feel that, to a first order, like the amount of charge, if you assume half of it is getting thrown out of M1 into this direction, if you make this transistor to have half the W by L, right? And at the same time, so there are so many assumptions here. The assumption is that phi and phi bar are exactly going to be complementary, right? That is to say, they are going to be exactly like this, right? Let's say this is phi and this is phi bar. Now, in practice, it is very difficult to align, differential signals, differential clock signals to be very accurate. For fairly lower frequencies, yes, it can be done, but it's not so easy, but it can be done. Okay. But on the other hand, saying that half the charge is the one which is getting dumped onto the right hand side is again guesswork, or more like a very approximate thing. Nobody actually knows how much charge is going to come to this side. Okay, so to a first order, using a dummy switch can help. At least some amount of charge will get accepted by this dummy switch. So this is your dummy switch. Okay, and this is your main switch. And this main switch can be that big gate, bootstrap switch that we have already seen. Okay. Now, this is the concept. It can work to some extent. To some extent, it can mitigate the problem. Okay. All right. There is one more method which is used. Okay, and this is basically used in many papers and probably in products also. And this is called as bottom plate sampling. Okay. Now, what is bottom plate sampling? So the concept is something like this. You have, this is your, V in, you have your switch. Let's say this is operating at phase 5, and this is your hold capacitor, right? Now the concept behind bottom plate sampling is this. The extra charge coming from the switch, let me call it switch S1, that charge can flow into the capacitor only if there is a current pass through the capacitor. Correct? Any capacitor can charge only if there is a current path. So the idea behind this technique is to say, what if I cut off the current path? Okay. So what they do is you put one more switch here. Okay. And this is given to a phase which is slightly different. I'll just put it as phi A, referring to phi advanced. Now, how this phi and phi A work is like this. Okay. Let's say if this is your phi, okay, this is your track phase and this is your hold phase, and now this is how it is. Your phi A is going to be like this. It's going to turn on along with phi, but what will happen is just a little time before the phi turns off, you will have actually turn off this phi A. Okay, some people say phi A advanced, phi delayed, whatever. Okay, it goes up at the same time. I mean, it's not necessary to go up at the same time. You can even have non-overlapping phases, kind of, one within the other. But the important thing is that it kind of turns off before the main switch turns off. Okay. So what happens once this switch turns off, right? There is no current path. So if there is no current path for Ch, now definitely this switch S1 cannot dump any charge onto your capacitor. So all the charge injection will happen to the left hand side to the source, okay, which we really are not bothered about right now. Okay. So this concept is called as bottom plate sampling. Okay. There is also one more technique which has the same name. When we come to it, we will look at it. But here the concept is you have a switch at the bottom plate of your capacitor and you turn it off before the main, just a little time before the main switch gets turned off. Now, some of you guys might ask the question, now you have introduced one more switch, let me call it as S2. Now, will not S2 also have charge injection? Correct? If you think about it, if you say S1 has charge injection, S2 also will have charge injection, right? And what you're saying is exactly true, right? But the advantage here is the charge injection of S1, charge injection of S1 is dependent on Vn. Okay. So in yesterday's class, I wrote an approximate equation saying that it's going to be somewhere proportional. The charge in the channel is going to be proportional to what? QCH is approximately, you can write it as WLC of VGS minus VTH, or in other words, here it is going to be Vn, right? Vn minus VTH, right? Now, or let's just write it VGS so that you know all the effects are taken care of. So now VGS is basically dependent on Vn, or let me just say dependent on Vn. So the charge in the channel is also a function of Vn. So let me just say charge in the function is function of Vn, which basically means that delta V due to charge injection is also a function of Vn, right? Now what happens if you have a delta V which is a function of Vn? Basically you have an output voltage which has a nonlinear dependence. So if you have, let's say, VH is going to be Vin, this is your ideal thing, right? Now if you have Vin plus some constant delta V naught, that is also something that you can take care of. If you say, okay, all the samples are shifted by some delta V, that is something you can take care of. Like you can always say there is a offset. This is basically called as an offset error. Offset error can always be taken care of. Okay, you can just finally at the end of the day you can calibrate it out, right? And even in the digital domain you can calibrate it out if necessary. Okay, but if you have VH equal to Vn plus some nonlinear function of Vn, right? Then what happens is you are going to have a VH is now going to be non-linearly dependent on Vn. So what happens? This will basically cause distortion. Okay. So which is why you will, if you look at some textbooks or even some papers, they will plot the just for a sample and hold. They will show you what is the HD2, HD3, and so on. Okay. And those things basically just the sample and hold. If you give a single tone at the input, you will see the second order distortion and the third order distortion and so on, because of the combined effect of all the other things. Okay, so the moral of the story is the charge injection due to S1 is dependent on Vn, which basically causes distortion. Okay, whereas the charge injection due to S2, okay, so S2 is basically either tapping to ground or not. That's it. Okay, the value that it is having is 0 volt, right? So it is basically this maybe some current flowing through the capacitor, right? But other than that, the job of it is basically what the voltage on the other side of the switch is 0 volt. Okay, so what you can say is the charge injection due to S2 is constant. Okay, so it basically will give you an error of VH is equal to actual Vn plus some delta V naught. Now this delta V naught can easily be taken care of in some way or the other. Okay, and this bottom plate sampling is often used in many in many places, and even this charge injection, people say we don't know how far even the simulators are able to predict that kind of a behavior. Okay. So of course nowadays there is a lot of improvement in the modeling of devices and so on, but still it is something which only experimentally people have. Experimentally you get the best idea. Okay. Simulators may be able to predict to some extent. That's it. Okay. All right. Now there is a very third method, which is a very powerful method. Okay. And this is something which is probably used in almost all data converters, if not all the data converters. Okay. And that is basically using fully differential architecture. So what you do is, instead of saying that I will just sample only V in, you mostly try to take V in plus and V in minus. Okay. The preferred thing is always a differential signal. So what happens? So you have let's say this is CHP, CHM. This is going to be a V in M, V in P. Okay, and this is going to be your phi. Okay. Now, what is the advantage of using a fully differential architecture? First of all, the charge injection problem. Okay, as long as if you use a gate booster, of course, this problem that we described of charge injection of S1 being dependent on V in, right? That probably is not so much because in gate boosted switches or bootstrap switches, because the VGS is constant. Okay, so in or even if you use the concept of having bottom plate sampling, right? You can use bottom plate sampling in this architecture also, right? You can have, let's say this is phi A, this is also phi A. Now what happens? The offset error that we talked about, right? Offset is the same for P and M path. Okay. So what happens? It becomes a common mode signal. Okay. Charge injection now becomes a common mode signal, which will get removed by CMRR. We looked at these concepts of CMRR and other things in the previous course, right? Analog VLSI course. So what is happening is, if you have a fully differential architecture, you do have charge injection coming from the main switch if you don't use bottom plate sampling, or if you use bottom plate sampling, you'll have a constant thing coming in, right? If you don't use bottom plate sampling and you don't use bootstrap switch, then again the problem is there, because V in P and V in M will be quite different, and therefore you'll have voltage dependent charge and you'll end up with the same problem. But if you use bottom plate sampling plus differential architecture, or if you use gate boosted switches or bootstrap switches with differential architecture, where you have a constant delta V naught added to your capacitor or your hold voltage, then it becomes a common mode signal, and the next stage is basically going to be a fully differential amplifier, where the common mode components are going to get rejected by the CMRR of your amplifier. Okay. Now the other effect of clock feed through, right? Clock feed through also, what happens? As this phi goes down, there will be a small going down here, and there will be small going down here. Okay. Nominally, the voltage by which they come down will be the same, because it's the same clock phase which is given to both the switches, right? And they both are switching at the same time, right? And nominally, if everything is pretty much symmetric, the delta V due to clock feed through, let me just write it as delta V CS. Okay, this is also common mode noise. And so what happens is, when you use fully differential architecture, this gets removed by the CMRR, because there's a finite CMRR of your amplifier. This common mode thing will get reduced by the CMRR of your. Okay, is this clear? So which is why you will see that pretty much all data converters will operate on a differential basis. Okay, and even if you have a single-ended output, what they will do is you will basically go and sample the ground. Okay, so first option is your input itself is V in P and V in M, right, and then goes to sample and hold, differential sample and hold, and so on. Okay, the other option is if you do not have differential signals, right, then sometimes what they do is you take V in and then you do a single-ended to differential conversion, okay, and then you use V in P and V in M, and then go through your sample and hold like this. Okay. Now the third option is basically if you don't have that, if you have only V in and ground, you will basically sample the V in here and you'll sample the ground here. Okay. Now what happens is you have a differential signal and then you use it. Okay. So there are tons of advantages by using fully differential systems, and you solve a lot of problems which arise in circuits by using fully differential systems. Okay. So which is why all the architectures are fully differential. Okay. And in fact, even because this is a mixed signal circuit, so you have these very sensitive signal lines going, and you also have these very large signal clock lines going around, right? So for example, let's say your signal line is V in here, and let's say somewhere here your clock line and clock bar is going. Okay. Now what will happen? There will be capacitive coupling between these two, or even if it doesn't go perpendicular, if it's going parallel or something like that, you will have some coupling. Okay. So as the clock transitions from, let's say, 0 to VDD, and let's say your signal here is in the order of some, microvolts, right? This capacitive coupling will definitely introduce noise onto your system. Okay. If you have a very large signal, then no problem. But if it's the order of microvolts that you are trying to send, then the capacitive coupling between the clock line and your actual line will basically kill your signal. Okay. So which is where if you have a differential line instead, okay, and both are symmetrically encountering the so-called aggressor, okay, clock is basically an aggressor. All right. Now what happens is it becomes a common mode noise, and when you use fully differential systems, all these common mode disturbances will get taken care of. Okay. When you run simulations itself, you will see how much of the sample and hold and all these mixed signal, the next thing being comparator design and all that, you'll see how much of noise gets added to your system, and it's basically your differential amplifier which will save the day. All right. Okay. Now any questions, any doubts till now? Okay.
No, sir.
Yeah. So now what we will do is we will just look at what are all the errors that happen, and some of them you will have to kind of live with. Okay. So I'll just draw the diagram, and also, okay, I haven't talked about jitter yet, right? Okay. So let's look at, there is one more effect which is jitter. Okay. So what is jitter? Have you guys encountered the term jitter? No? Okay.
Yes, sir.
So in which context have you encountered jitter?
In asynchronous clock signals.
Okay. So what is jitter basically? What is clock jitter?
I'm not sure, sir. I think it's when clock signal reaches different gates at different times.
That is Q.
That's Q.
Clock
Okay.
Q. Right? So clock jitter basically is the uncertainty in the arrival of the edge. Or uncertainty in the edge, let me just say arrival of the edge of the clock. Okay, can be positive edge. You can reference everything to the positive edges, or you can reference everything to the negative edges. I think conventionally people look at this thing. So there are different types of jitter. There is period jitter, so clock, the cycle to cycle jitter. So all these things are there. In general, if I have to give a we will look at jitter a little more in a detailed way as the course progresses, and we'll link it up with phase noise in the RFIC course. But right now, just to give you an understanding, see, when you are drawing clock waveforms, what will you do? You'll just put a very nice, neat clock, right? And you'll also say, let's say, even if there is some small rise time, fall time, you can accommodate that. When you are running simulations also, you will get very precise clocks, right? Because you are going to put V pulse or some voltage, ideal voltage source, which will be extremely perfect. Now in practice, the clock signals are generated by oscillators, and oscillators are affected by something called as phase noise, which basically what happens is, if you were to take this clock source, let's say you have a clock source, and you look at connect it to a DSO, okay, a digital storage oscilloscope, okay, and you look at the edges of the clock, okay, and let's say you kind of set the time span such that the rising edge is overlapping with each other, right? Then you will see that the rising edge does not always come precisely on time. Okay, it will come slightly before, slightly later. Okay, in other words, let me let us, for example, take a 1 megahertz clock. Okay, let's say clock frequency is 1 megahertz. All right. Now, what time period for this clock?
1 microsecond.
1 microsecond, correct. Right. So what do you expect? Let's say this is time 0. Okay, let's say this is time t equal to 0. You expect this to come exactly at 1 microsecond. This should come at 2 microsecond. This should be at 3 microsecond. This should be at 4 microsecond. But in reality, what will happen is this will be some 997 nanoseconds. Okay, and this can be some 2.01 microseconds. This can be 3.03 microseconds. This can be 3.95 microseconds. Okay. So if you really plot it, I just gave you an example. I mean, probably it's a little kind of not so extreme. I mean, you can easily have some, around 5 nanosecond error. It's possible. Okay. So what you are seeing here, this is what is called as jitter. Okay. So you can quantify it as period jitter, cycle to cycle jitter, and all those things. All those terminology, we'll look at it slightly later. But now what is happening is, okay, let's say I am going to overlay my sinusoid. Okay, let's say my sinusoid is going to be like this. All right. And I'm sampling my signal. This is my x of t that I'm sampling. Okay. Let's assume that my first sample is correct. Okay. Now you expected the second sample should come at what? Exactly 1 microsecond. In other words, your y of n should be nothing but a sine 2 pi f 1 microsecond. Correct? This is what you wanted. Okay. But what did you get? You get a sine 2 pi f 0.997 microsecond. So will there be a change in the value that is actually sampled? Yes or
Yes.
no? Yes, right?
Yes,
So
sir.
the same way, for each of the instance, what is happening is there will be a very small change, right? It's not going to be a very large change, right? But there is going to be a small change. And especially when you are designing data converters, we are talking about very small, resolution data converters. And this jitter is basically going to affect your performance. Okay. So typically your SNR or your SNDR will be limited by jitter also. Okay. Now the error that you are getting here what we can do is, so if I zoom into any one of the transitions, okay, let's say my signal is going to, I'm just zooming it in, okay, probably a little exaggerated, okay, but this is where I wanted my signal to come, but instead my signal, let's say, has come here, right? So this is my delta t error, right? And that has resulted in what? Some delta x error in the signal, correct? Now, how can we quantify the x? Delta x, because this is highly zoomed in. Let's say we are now talking about, some picosecond range or femtosecond range kind of, that kind of number. Let's say picosecond range. Usually jitter will be, for gigahertz clock will be in the range of some picoseconds and so on. Okay. Now delta x can be written as dx by dt into delta t. Okay. So where delta t is your jitter, dx by dt is the slope of the signal. You can assume that it has a linear slope because like it's a highly zoomed in version, right? Like you can pretty much assume that it's just a linear interpolation here, right? So the slope of the signal into delta t will give you the delta x. Now this error, okay, of course, this is for one sample. You can calculate this error for, like, let's say so many samples, like how do you so you will end up with, let's say, a noise power, okay, the noise power can be, or let's say sigma delta x squared can be taken as what? 1 by n summation of n equal to 1 to n, where n limit n tends to a very large number, okay, and you have delta x squared, x n squared, okay. So that means you look at the error at the first position, the first edge, second edge, third edge, fourth edge, like that. You take, let's say, some thousands of edges, you compute the error, and this process is usually random, okay. The uncertainty is usually random in nature, okay. So you basically get a certain spread, and what you're calculating here is the mean squared error, okay. The mean squared error, if you calculate, this is basically going to be your noise due to jitter, noise power due to jitter, okay. So what will happen is, jitter will, now that we computed the noise, this will definitely go and affect your SNR, okay. Do you understand? Have you got it? So jitter is basically, it is coming correctly at the point at which it is supposed to come, due to which you get some error. You compute the mean squared error, right? And that is nothing but the noise because of jitter, and that will basically limit your SNR. So we can basically say that jitter affects or limits SNR, okay, among many other things. Okay. Now, in addition to just the clock itself having a certain jitter, okay, if you do not do this bootstrap switch, all right. Now, let me just draw this example. Let's assume that there is no bootstrapping, okay, and let's say this is your signal, okay, this is your Vin, and let me draw the clock waveform. Let's say the clock waveform is basically going like this, okay. Usually what you say, the middle of the clock transition is your sampling instant, right? Now I'm basically talking about a normal transistor, just an NMOS, and you're having this spike. This is your spike, okay. Now if you do not do bootstrapping, there's one more problem here, right? Because your Vin at this point is quite low, the transistor will actually turn off only, somewhere here, okay. Suppose your Vin is quite high, then the transistor will actually turn off somewhere at a higher location. In other words, you are getting some delta t in the sampling instance. In other words, if bootstrapping is not done, the sampling instant is dependent on Vn. Correct? So for if your Vn is very low, it will take a longer time, it will kind of have a delayed sample. If your Vn is very high, you will sample ahead of the time. Whereas actually you are supposed to sample in the middle of the clock transition. Okay. So which is why again, bootstrapped switch will solve this issue. So you not only have Ron which is dependent on Vn, but you also have what? The sampling instant being dependent on Vn. And that will definitely contribute to the analysis here will go exactly something like this, and definitely it will limit your SNM. So all these different things are going to basically kind of wreck your sample and hold. So you have to, especially if you want to build a very high resolution data converter, all these things will have to be taken care of. Okay. All right. Now there is also one more thing which is called as hold mode feed through. This is another hold mode feed through. Okay. Before I do that, yeah. Okay. Hold mode feed through. Now by now I think you would be getting a sense of what we are doing, right? Let's say this is your sampling switch. Now this can be a gate boosted switch also, or a bootstrap switch also. In the hold mode, your switch is supposed to be completely off, right? But let's say this is your clock. It has some clock driver which will have some output impedance, and then let's say this is the output impedance of your clock driver. Now what happens is there is capacitance here, right? Overlap capacitance on both sides. So now let us say in this time also the signal is changing. When you are supposed to be holding the value, the input can change, right? But then because if you didn't have these overlap capacitances, what will happen? The switch will work very well. The switch will have perfect isolation, right? But now because of these capacitances, depending on the frequency of your input signal, right? Higher the frequency, you will have more feed through. The lower the frequency, less feed through. So this kind of effect will basically be there. Okay? So you will probably see some small changes in the output voltage, and this is what is called as hold mode feed through. Okay? So again, here the way that you can reduce hold mode feed through by reducing W, right? So if you have a lower switch width, okay, the sampling switch width, if it is a smaller transistor, then overlap capacitance will be lesser, and this effect will also be less pronounced. But as we discussed in yesterday's class, having a smaller width will also increase your on resistance, and having an increased on resistance will limit your bandwidth of operation. Okay, so all these trade-offs are basically there. Okay. So now, having seen all these things, let's put all the stuff together, and if you give a step input, okay, to your sample and hold, how will it basically behave? Okay, or maybe some fast varying signal, how will it behave? So let us look at it. Okay, let's say this is your time axis, and let's say here, let's say your input was something like this. All right, it has basically changed when you were in your hold mode. Okay, earlier it was low. Okay, let me also draw the clock waveform. So the clock waveform is going to be coming like this. Let me parallelly draw here. Let's say now we are in the hold mode. Okay, sorry, hold mode. Now we are going up here to the track mode, and then again you are going down to the hold mode, right? So this is your phi, this is your clock waveform. Okay, this curve is nothing but your input voltage. Now let us see what is going to happen to the output. Now the output, what will happen is, it is already at a lower voltage. There's a larger jump, between when you sampled the previous time and now when you are sampling. So first of all, now the sample and hold has to come up and charge up and track. Okay. So if it is just a issue of, if it's just a MOSFET which is tracking, then basically it will start having a response something like this. All right. But many times you will put some op amps around it. So we will discuss those circuits after this. Okay. Probably in the next class. But so when you have an op amp, let's just understand that there is some op amp involved in the sample and hold operation. So we will go through those circuits in the next class. So what will happen? For a large step, your op amp will start slewing, right? So what will happen is, basically you'll first have a slewed response, and then what will happen? Op amp slewing will happen. Then because the op amp will have multiple poles and zeros, there will be a little bit of overshoot and ringing. Okay, I think I have to change the scale of my diagram. Let's say here it is slewing, and then what is happening is, the op amp is having some overshoot, right? This is due to slew rate. This is overshoot because of, let's say, not of the smaller phase margin and so on, right? And then you'll have this ringing, and then it will basically settle. I will not show so much ringing. Let's say it is kind of going to settle, but the settling also is not going to be perfect. Okay, we will see that when we look at the thing, but this is very easy to derive. When you have an op amp, there can be a very small error. Okay, extremely small error, but this is the small discrepancy between V in and V out, what is called as the error band. Okay, and sometimes this is also called as the static error. Okay. So this error will come because the gain of your op amp is not high enough. Okay, so slew rate, we know why it comes. I mean, the slewing happens because of finite slew rate, and overshoot and ringing, these both will happen because of poorer phase margin, right? And the error band comes because of finite op amp gain. So we will see the op amp based implementations and so on. Now what happens is, after this you come to the hold, right? Now when you come to the hold, what happens is, there will be some shift in the voltage. Sometimes it can directly go down like this, or sometimes it will have some ringing. Now this is what is called as the pedestal error. Now why is this pedestal error coming? Pedestal error is coming because of the charge injection, clock feed through, etc. Okay. Basically, there will be a little drop in the voltage because of the clock feed through effects, and you will also have effects due to the other things. Okay. Now what will happen is, if you leave this capacitor like this for a longer time in the hold mode, slowly this capacitor will also start discharging. Okay, this is what is called as droop, hold mode droop, and this is called as the droop rate. I mean, the rate at which it goes down. Okay, now why is there droop? If you look at a MOSFET, right? Let's say this is at 0 volt, right? And you're expected to hold this value, right? But then between the drain and bulk, you have reverse bias diodes, correct? So this is an NMOS transistor. So this is N type drain, and this is the bulk, which is P type, right? So you have a reverse biased junction diode. Now the reverse biased junction diode will also have what? Some saturation current which is flowing even when it is reverse biased. So if you're going to keep the capacitor in the hold mode for a very long time, what will happen? This reverse saturation current has to come from where? The capacitor only. Okay. So that capacitor will start, the capacitor voltage will start drooping because of all these leakage parts. Okay. Now you would have studied in your device physics that even the transistor itself will have some leakage current, right? There will be some leakage current, I leak, between the drain to source current depending on the voltage here. Let's say on the other side the voltage is now going low, right? Now there can be, this will be the drain, that will be the source, right? Even though VGS is 0, you will have subthreshold conduction, you will have dibble, jiddle and all those things, and there will be some amount of current which is getting conducted. So leakage current of the transistor and the reverse saturation current of these reverse bias diodes, they will cause hold mode droop. Okay. So which is why we, especially for IC based data converters, you don't want to, sample at very low rates. Okay. Even if you want even if the bandwidth of the signal is very low, very small, you still, like to sample it at a little higher rate so that you don't encounter this drooping in the hold mode. Okay. So you will see that all these different issues happen when you have a sample and hold, and all the circuit techniques that we have been looking at, you use it to minimize these things. For example, you can enhance the slew rate of your op amp, you can have better phase margin in your op amp, you can have, that is why you try to have as high a gain as possible in your op amp so that you don't have static error. And pedestal error, you can basically, even if you have pedestal error, use a differential architecture, maybe use bottom plate sampling so that you have a constant pedestal error, right, which can be calibrated out or which can be removed by fully differential architecture. And you try to have a fairly higher slope, fairly higher sampling rate so that you don't encounter this hold mode droop. Okay. Any questions, any doubts? Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, so we'll wind up the class now and we'll continue on Monday or in the next class. Okay. Okay, thanks everyone. Have a nice day.
Thank you, sir.